Hello everyone, I'm Cazzola. I'm with the International Transport Forum and I'm here to introduce to you a report on regulations and standards for clean trucks and buses that we just developed and published in September. Thanks to the organizer for giving me this opportunity. First, let me say something about the ITF, which is the institution for which I am working. So this is an intergovernmental organization with 62 member countries that covers all transport modes. It acts as a think tank for transport policy on topics such as covering topics such as data and statistics, analysis, the identification of best policy practices, and we are happy to use our the possibility to access to all the members to help them share knowledge. We are the organizers of an annual summit of transport ministers that happens typically every year in the month of May in Germany. And we have an instrument called Corporate Partnership Board to foster the dialogue directly with the private sector. And we act as a platform for discussion and pre-negotiation of transport policy developments. We have 5 focal areas of work: digitalization, connectivity, safety and security, universal access, and decarbonization. What I'm going to talk about today relates most closely with the decarbonization pillar, but also with safety and security, since we're going to cover aspects related with vehicle safety and refueling. So the report I'm going to talk about is aims to review progress on regulations and standards that have been specifically looking at heavy vehicles. And in the framework of this workshop, the part most relevant is the one related with trucks. It will focus on specific technologies that are enabler of low or near zero emissions. They are battery electric vehicles, plug-in hybrid vehicles, and fuel cell electric vehicles. It will look at aspects that link with safety of the vehicles, but also safety of charging and refueling infrastructure, as well as environmental performance and energy consumption. The background of this is that there have been dynamic developments in this space, especially in electrification, but also growing interest in hydrogen, and that these technologies have been emerging as a very interesting possible development for a decarbonization pathway. The vehicle ones, the technologies on the vehicles I mentioned before, but also technologies on fuels, in particular, for example, biofuels or electrofuels. Regulations and standards in principle are also a major prerequisite for any kind of large-scale deployment, and so it's important to have a clear look of what is already done and what not. So when it comes to vehicle safety, first thing I want to say is that the reference for the work done so far is the World Forum for Harmonization of Vehicle Regulations, WP29 in the UN. Typically the regulations and standards that exist tend to cover all vehicles at once, with a focus on light vehicles. And the reason for this is that the market size of light vehicle is larger, and normally that means that that's a starting point where one begins to develop regulations and standards. Then this also means that some of the provisions for heavy vehicles have gaps, and I'm going to talk about them in the recommendation. And these are specifically relevant for fuel cell electric vehicles, but not only, and also relate sometimes with specific requirements of the different duty cycles of heavy vehicles compared to light vehicles. Second topic I'm going to cover is hydrogen refueling. So the key places where that is handling these are the ISO, International Standardization Organization, and the Society of Automotive Engineers, especially for North America, the last one, but also WP29 mentioned earlier when it comes to vehicle related aspects of hydrogen storage. The existing regulations when it comes to vehicles mainly focus on compressed gaseous onboard storage. In the case of light vehicles, this includes storage at 70 megapascal. For heavy vehicles, it's primarily related with storage at 35 megapascal. That's because the original interest was on buses, and 35 were enough for buses for the daily range. But now interest is shifting towards trucks, and so you need a greater amount of hydrogen to be stored on board, and that's why 70 megapascal. The regulatory framework for this is not yet ready, so there are no refueling protocol nor nozzle for high flow suitable for trucks, but there is work ongoing on this. And It's also important to mention that besides gaseous storage, there are other ways to store hydrogen on board, and these include liquid hydrogen chemical bonding or swapping systems. At the moment, what is closest to being properly regulated is liquid hydrogen, since there are already draft texts in the UN regulations, but this is not yet in a final form. And finally, another point which is important for hydrogen refueling is the need for high fuel purity to avoid polluting the PM fuel cells, proton exchange membrane fuel cells, which require very, very clean hydrogen to work properly and to last longer. Third topic is electric vehicle charging. So the key reference are the International Electrotechnical Commission, the ISO and SAE, already mentioned earlier. In addition, there are two associations, CHAdeMO and CHARIN, which are rooted either in the electricity industry or in the European automotive industry. But they all bring on a wide range of stakeholders. When it comes to electric vehicle charging, one important thing to say is that these have been first focused on cars, and what has been done for cars is also suitable for light commercials, and to some extent, to a good extent, also for buses, especially in case of daily charge and depot charging, where 50 kilowatt power are sufficient to basically go through a charging cycle for more than one buses overnight. But this is not enough if you want to bring electrification to trucks. So that requires what is being developed right now by the different associations and institutions working on this is our charging system that exceed 1 megawatt of power in the case of trucks. And there's definitely work that has to happen to make this feasible. And in addition to this, there is also another solution, which are the electric roads. So these are also a space where there's more work required to ensure that standards and regulations are final. When it comes to environmental performance, which is the focus of this other slide, I'll talk first about vehicles here, and then I'll look at other aspects on linking with other components of the life cycle emissions of vehicles. So the reference institution is again WP29 at the UN. There's a lot of work done on these though in national administrations and at the EU, in particular by DG GROW. Regulations are primarily focused on tailpipe energy use and emissions of either pollutants or greenhouse gases. Generally speaking, when we talk about heavy-duty vehicles, we're talking about regulations that look at the engines. But these have now more recently been complemented by regulations that integrate results from portable emission measurement systems for on-road testing. When it comes to the greenhouse gas emissions, the way to actually develop regulation relies quite a bit on software tools. Key software that you may have come across are Vector, which is used in Europe, and GEM, which is used in North America. There's no international harmonization about these, and in particular for the part on greenhouse gas emissions. And this is an issue because international harmonization is important to ensure that you can benefit from scale economies and facilitate trade. And there is further work needed also to integrate aspects that relate specifically to low and zero emission vehicles, so to the technologies I mentioned at the beginning, into the emission regulation. When it comes to environmental performance, there are also provisions required for vehicle manufacturing and fuel production. So these are important to ensure that what happens is effective on a life cycle basis. There is quite a lot of work going on currently on batteries, since they are a core feature of low and zero emission vehicles, whether they use electricity or hydrogen, and an important contributor to carbon emissions due to embedded carbon, especially if some of their components are produced, for example, from coal-based electricity. I'm thinking of aluminium in this case. It's also important to ensure that end-of-life treatment of batteries is properly managed if one wants to achieve proper environmental performance on a life cycle basis, and also sustainability, to address sustainability concerns. So there is significant work done on this, especially at the EU, and but not only. And governments have also been working on the carbon intensity of fuels or energy vectors, in the topic of what is called well to tank and tank to wheel. And key examples are the low carbon fuel standard in California, the Renewable Energy Directive, and the Fuel Quality Directive in Europe. And it's important to ensure that also electricity and hydrogen are brought into this kind of framework once we look at low and zero. The next few slides will be about our recommendations. So based on the analysis that we developed, we understood that there is a need to ensure for full coverage of all classes of vehicles in regulations and standards for heavy vehicles when it comes to safety. There is a possibility to leverage on the experience of international regulatory fora like the W2029. It is important to address some specific aspects, for example, thermal runaway and propagation on large batteries used for trucks. This is something that is where work is ongoing, but is not yet finalized. And there is a need to ensure that when it comes to hydrogen, aspects that are currently not addressed will need to be covered in regulations. These are things that relate to the fact that the heavy vehicles have a higher lifetime travel and therefore different requirements in terms of durability. There is also a need for periodic inspections for the vessels, currently not at all required. And there are needs to develop crash-related safety provisions, especially relevant for rollover of the vehicles when the storage tanks are on the roof, and this is the case for when it comes to EV charging, what is clear is that 1 megawatt charger or more is something that requires very close cooperation between energy-related stakeholders and automotive. When it comes to trucks, we're talking about mission-critical charging events and therefore high power requirements at any point in time during the day, and that is something that normally is not easy to digest by an electricity distribution system, and this is why this cooperation is extremely important. The fora that are already working on that are those that will continue to be relevant. When it comes to e-roads, it's important to underline that in order to have a scale up of e-roads, there are a number of things that need to happen on the standardization side. For example, there's no way to meter right now the electricity consumed by trucks on e-roads. There are no general safety specifications ready, and there's a need to ensure interoperability of these systems. So the process is further ahead for catenaries because of the experience in rail and in trolleybus services, but there are important gaps there. When it comes to hydrogen refueling, so the key aspects, I mentioned them earlier, are the need to ensure 70 megapascal hydrogen storage for heavy vehicles, develop high flow nozzles, develop refueling protocols for 70 megapascal, and ensure compliance with stringent fuel quality requirement. There has been also work going on in terms of pre-normative research on the safe use of low and zero emission vehicles in existing infrastructure, in particular tunnels and garages. But this work is not enough. There's a big gap, especially for hydrogen vehicles, to ensure that there is a proper handling of these vehicles, especially heavy duty, in existing infrastructure. And this is something that clearly emerged from our work as an area where much more work is necessary. On the environmental performance, key requirements are the need to harmonize regulations on tailpipe greenhouse gas emissions. I mentioned this earlier. It's important for scale, but we're very far from that, and there's a significant amount of work that needs to happen there. There's a need for a full integration of electricity and hydrogen into regulatory policies related with low carbon fuels. This is also something I mentioned earlier. There is, in the case of hydrogen-powered combustion engines, there's a need to ensure that non-regulated pollutants are properly covered, but also regulated pollutants. And then there is a need to develop innovative regulations that relate with durability, carbon footprint, and sustainability of electric vehicle batteries, especially for large batteries like those needed in trucks. Finally, there's a need to develop an internationally harmonized regulatory framework for differentiated road charges and access restrictions based on environmental performances of vehicles. This is important because what is currently available is not really allowing different local administrations to adopt policies that are consistently applicable across different types, across consistent groups of vehicles. Let me finish thanking again the organizers for this and apologizing for having gone 30 seconds longer than my 15 minutes. And I would like to and would be more than happy to respond to all your questions. Thank you very much.